Today we're live here with Jeff and Moises. So just so you guys know, I never introduce my guests. I like them to introduce themselves. So if you can, we can start with Jeff. Jeff, if you can talk a little about you, how you got to this point, and how you got to be you right now.
How I got to this point. I love that. Um, Moises and I co-founded Tectonic Theater Project together right out of school many years ago. And we have worked together on every project that Tectonic has done since then. So it's been a wonderful life in the theater. And um, from starting off very, very small with very little audience um, to uh, to becoming an important devising company, if I may say so, and having our plays done all over the world. Um, it's been a wonderful journey that started very, very small in this room where I'm sitting in our home.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Love.
and now I am, in addition to co-founder. I'm also directing our company's international programming. So having our plays known and done around the world and teaching our method, moment work, which is our method of devising, to theater makers and non-theater makers all over the world.
Yeah, amazing. We'll talk about moment work in a while. Moises?
Well, I grew up in Venezuela, and I when I got to be 17, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So my parents suggested that I study business administration
Most
because
Latino parents do that.
they felt that it would open many doors for me it would allow me to do many things. And I joined the university for business administration, and after a few classes, I realized that it wasn't really for me. So I ran downstairs and they had an extracurricular activities department where you could find out other activities that were not in the curriculum. And the first on the list was theater. So I joined the university theater group, and I was fortunate enough that was led by a very, very brilliant director called Fernando Ivoski. And very soon, that theater company at the university became the most important experimental theater company in Venezuela. And I was acting with the company. And what I loved about it is that we were doing, Moliere, and we were doing UNESCO, and we were doing all of these really interesting playwrights. And at the same time, in Venezuela, at that time, there was a really important international theater festival. So we were getting to see the work of Peter Brook and Jerzy Grotowski and Tadeusz Kantor and all of these, real luminaries in the theater world. And so my theatrical education was always in that world. So much so that when I saw my first realistic play, I thought, oh, this is so avant-garde, because there was actually like a kitchen sink and water came out of it. And I thought, and I probably had the same response that the people in Moscow had when they first saw The Seagull, the kind of realism that was a vocabulary I wasn't used to. When I graduated from school, I decided that I wanted to study theater full time. So I went to New York University, and the experimental theater wing, which is where I went, was influenced by a lot of the same people that I had been studying. So I decided to go there. And after a couple of years there, Jeff and I met, and we shared this impatience with realism and naturalism. We both felt that as forms, those are forms that film and television can do better. And so we wanted to see how does the theater speak? What are the new forms and modalities and theatrical languages that we can use in the theater? And that's why we created Tectonic Theater Project. Tectonic, as you may know, is the art and science of form, structure, architecture, architectonic. And we were really interested in form, in what are the forms that we can do on stage to really explore what theatricality is. And so we created the company, and the company is now almost 35 years old. And the first 5 years of the company were very, 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 very difficult. Usually we had more actors on stage than audience members on seats. Um, But then in 1997, we created Gross Indecency, the three trials of Oscar Wilde, and
Oh,
that became a big hit in New York, and it ran for 2 years in the city. And all of a sudden, we weren't the best kept secret in American theater anymore.
amazing. By the way, that's one of my favorite plays. I just read it last night again, and I see Oscar Wilde back there looking
Yes,
at me.
that was
Yeah,
the original poster of the original production.
yeah, amazing, beautiful. And Jeff, if you can talk about like between you and Moises, what was the first kind of spark that you guys all look at each other and you said we had to create this company, we had to create something together?
Well, it's an interesting story. We were both students at NYU, and I was studying international relations, and Moises was studying theater. And there was, by pure coincidence, an intercession class, like a short class just in the month of January in political theater, and it was taught by Augusto Blaauw.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, so he we had studied him and his books, of course, and then we got to study directly with him at NYU, and that's how Moises and I met. And so we immediately had an interest in theater for social change, devised theater, um, and we were young college students, so we were very enthusiastic about putting that all to work. And so when Moises proposed starting a theater company, um, I was all in. That's really how it started.
Amazing. Yeah, that's where the best idea starts like that.
And
Just
a
like,
few
let's
years,
do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lightning strike. And then a few years later, maybe 4 years after that, we brought a group to the International Festival of Theater of the Oppressed in Rio de Janeiro. And it coincided, that festival, with the massacre of children and adolescents at the Calendaria Church in Rio de Janeiro in 1993, I believe. And so that also gave us, when we participated in they did a political funeral for the victims. And our group, which was a youth group, um, created a piece for that, and made a big piece with the rest of the participants. And it was really it was a terrible time, but it also did help us see the power of devised theater, about creating theater quickly about issues that mean something to you, and addressing social ills in a communal way.
Oh, I didn't know about that story. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And how did the moment work technique, or I don't know how to call it because it's more than that, came to be, and you guys starting thinking about that? Or was it just organic?
Well, I think that the question that we wanted to pose in the company is, how does theater speak? What are the new theatrical vocabularies and the new theatrical languages, right? That are not about a kitchen sink and that are not about, the kind of realism that Americans are so in love with. And so first, we started doing plays by Samuel Beckett and Sophie Treadwell and Brecht and Franz Xavier Kreutz and, real experimentalists. And we started creating exercises to help us explore those texts. But then we realized that if we were really being rigorous about theatrical form, it wasn't enough to keep staging pre-existing texts, but we had to create our own plays. And so we started trying to come up with exercises to help us create those texts and create those plays. And so moment work is a technique that we developed in order to be able to create the work that we wanted to do. We felt that so much of the theater that is made in America is made by a writer going into a room, and she spends 20 years in that room. And we all have an image of what that room looks like, with cobwebs and empty vodka bottles. And she comes out of that room, and she hands the play to a director who has 3 weeks of rehearsal, 1 week of tech, and then the play's up. And to me, that creates a theater that may be very dramatic and very textually based, but it's not a theater that it's set up to really allow for explorations of theatrical languages and theatrical vocabularies. So moment work is basically a technique to create theater using theatrical tools and theatrical elements. So it's a technique by which a group of actors, designers, directors, playwrights, they come into a room together and they begin to use moment work to explore ideas, themes, stories, and they create the story together. So that's what moment work is. It's a way of devising performance as opposed to devising text.
Amazing. And what would you say is like when they first got into the room, all this the creatives, what is the first spark that you guys need to give them to start the work?
Well, I think that usually it's led by the person who is creating the piece. Even though we work very collaboratively, there's always one leader, the person who has the idea. And so usually what we do is that the person who has the idea comes into the room, shares the idea with the group, shares material with the group, and then they start improvising. Sorry.
Bless you. So would
Uh,
you?
so that's how we do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
sometimes it's research material, sometimes it's interviews, sometimes it's other kinds of prompts. It really can vary. And
Yeah,
moment work can also be used to work on existing text and as a rehearsal technique if you're not devising your own play.
that's amazing. So I think we can. Why don't we talk about a little bit about the trials of Oscar Wilde and how that came to creation, and we can talk later about the Larim project, which is very. I mean, it hasn't been translated to Portuguese, I think, but people here love that play.
I think it has been.
It has been, right? I think it
It
has
has
been.
been
Right,
translated
it's
to
been published.
Portuguese.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
because it was done in Rio and then it was done in Sao Paulo.
Was it published? Do you remember
I don't
or?
remember if it was
Don't
published,
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. I'll
but there were
check.
certainly productions of it.
Yeah, amazing.
What do I tell you about gross indecency? Gross indecency started because I always knew that Oscar Wilde had been tried for being gay. But a friend of mine gave me a book with the transcripts of the trial. And what was interesting was that so many of the questions that they were asking him in the trial were about his writing. It was about his art. Um, they asked him about the picture of Dorian Gray. Do you think that book is a moral or immoral book? Oh, Mr. Wilde, in this play you wrote this sentence. Is that a moral sentence? So I realized that yes, Oscar Wilde was tried for being gay, but he was also tried for being an artist, a subversive artist that was poking fun at a lot of Victorian hypocrisies. And so I decided to write that play, and the play was the trial of the artist, and alongside with the trial of the homosexual. And then when we started doing the research, we realized that we started encountering discrepancies between the narratives. So Lord Alfred Douglas would say, "This is what happened," and then Oscar Wilde would say, "No, that's not what happened. This is what happened," and then the lawyer would say, "No, that's not what happened. This is what happened." And in our naivete, we thought that by the time we were done with the research, we would know who was telling the truth. Of course, when we were done with the research, we realized that what we were left with was a bunch of versions of history. So the challenge became, how do you create a play about the impossibility of reconstructing history? And that's how that play came about. Jeff, anything you want to add?
I would just add that, that was one of the most important steps in our history of using and developing moment work, because the actors dealt with the research, because it was so much research. And in fact, in the play, and at the top of Act 2 of the play, there's a very surprising scene in which there's a scene of Moisés, a character called Moisés, interviewing a librarian about Wilde. So yeah, that was like the first flourishing of moment work, I would say.
And that process of writing it, Moises, did you use a group to get to, or did you had a first draft and then you started using like the moment kind of the beginnings of the moment work techniques?
We had a very rough first draft.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did is, as I said, I came into the room and I said, these are the books about Lord Alfred Douglas. And I went to the actor playing Lord Alfred Douglas. I said, here, you take these books and you become an expert in these books. And then I went to the actor playing Oscar Wilde. I said, here are the books on Oscar Wilde. And I had marked some texts in the books that I was interested. And each person I gave books and material on their characters. So then I would say, okay, what happened on the second day of the trial? And so Lord Alfred Douglas would say, oh, here it says that. So they were able to participate by creating moments that had to do with the history of their characters.
Amazing, amazing. And Jeffrey, Jeff, I always keep you
Right.
calling by your full name, but how did the international program came to be, especially like with the creation of the plays and like you desire to bring the moment work and the tectonic projects to a broader audience?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said from the beginning, we did have some international exposure with doing this, bringing bringing some newly created plays to a festival in Brazil. But then also, as our plays started to become well known, starting with Gross Indecency, but certainly through Laramie Project and others, our work has been done internationally very widely. And only very rarely have we been directly involved in those productions. And so I felt like that was a, a loss for us. I thought that was something that we could really be more involved in. And so that was the idea behind the international programs. And so we have developed relationships with many of the theaters who have done our work, especially in Spain and Italy, in Latin America, and we're trying to expand to other places as well. And so we very much want our plays to be seen, but we also would like, to the extent that we can, have our productions be seen, be able to uh, be present for those productions and teach about moment work and teach about our process, um, and have that expand worldwide as well.
That's just great and amazing that that's in place and it keeps getting bigger, right? Hopefully, we'll do it one day here again in Brazil. I don't
We
know
would
if you
love
guys
Where
that.
are you now?
what I'm in
Where
São
are
Paulo.
you now?
São Paulo. Yeah, I don't know if you when the Laramie project got done here, if you guys were involved or not, but
It was like 20 years ago or 15 years
okay.
ago. And then it
So
was done
can
in Rio. In Rio, it was done more recently, like 10 years ago.
oh okay, I see, I see. Amazing. Can we talk a little bit about how that came to be, the Laramie project?
Yes, well, we were on tour with Gross Indecency, and then we found out that Matthew Shepard had been kidnapped and that he had been tied to a fence and left to die because he was gay. And then the next 3 days, we and the whole world was really paying attention to what was happening to him at the hospital, hoping that he would survive, and then he didn't survive. And at that moment, we had just finished doing a play about Oscar Wilde, so we were very keenly aware of how discrimination plays itself out in the actual world. But the thing that really impressed me is that when I was writing the play about Oscar Wilde, reading the transcripts of the trial was very moving to me. Because if it's true that the people who spoke at the trial spoke about homosexuality and about art, they also spoke about religion. And they also spoke about violence. And they also spoke about government. And they also spoke about politics. So that the transcripts of the trials was a document that recorded kind of the ideological pillars of Victorian society. So that you read it and you can feel how Victorian men and women could thought about all of these things. And at that moment, I thought, well, if we take the company to Laramie and we talk to the people of the town, we might be able to gather a document that tells us where America is at the end of the millennium. And not only about sexual orientation, but about gender identity, about violence, about religion, about all of these things that determine how we live our lives. So that was the impetus behind trying to go to Laramie. And so we took 10 people And I'm very moved because for the longest time, Tectonic Theater Project didn't have a cent. But when Gross Indecency happened, it was the first. It became a success, and it was the first time that Tectonic had money in the bank. So we could use that money to fly and house people to go to Laramie and interview the people of the town. And I find something very moving about Oscar Wilde paying for us to take a trip to write the story of Matthew Shepard.
What a big full circle kind of right moment. That's incredible. And how was the start of the creation of the play? What was the first materials that you guys looked at, or what is
Jeff,
like?
you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, it started with media accounts of what had happened. And that's how we found out, that's how the world found out, and we started reading about that. And we decided very quickly to do something rather risky because we had never done it before, which was to conduct interviews. And so we acted not as journalists because we're not journalists, but as theater makers using a journalistic tool. And we were a group of 10 people who went to the town of Laramie where Matthew Shepard had been killed less than a month after the murder. And so we felt that it was very important to go quickly and to get people's reactions right away. And so we started interviewing people and we learned how to conduct interviews. And so, John Ware, the playwright, says that a writer is like a sculptor that makes their own clay. And so I think in this case, that's very much true because we were not only making clay in the sense of writing text, but we were finding the raw materials from which to make the play. And so that was really, and so that first trip of about a week or 10 days, we gathered dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of interviews, which formed the first basis of the raw materials for the Laramie project. And then we returned several times over the next 15 months. We were there 7 or 8 times. So we had a very, very deep, sort of toolbox of materials to work from, which made it very, very difficult to structure as a play, but it gave us a very broad range of opinions and voices, and we feel that it was very successful in that. And I would just add one more thing. As you may know, the American West, the Mountain West, is a very important part of the American identity myth. So, people relate the American West with something some core essence of being American. And so we suspected, and I think we were right, that letting people from the American West speak about this event that had just occurred would be a really fascinating analysis of what has become of, or what had become at that time of America in its first 200 years.
Oops, I'm muted. So, just sort of to keep wrap up, when it came to directing those plays, how much the devised in technique came to the directing process as well?
Very much. I mean, Laramie Project was created entirely with moment work. So those 10 people came into a room in New York and nobody knew what the other people had gathered. So I knew the interviews I conducted, but I didn't know the interviews Jeff conducted or Lee or. So the first task was to present to one another what we had found. So we did all of that with moment work. And then, when we started hearing what were the events that really mattered to the people of the town, we started out. So I would say in the rehearsal room in New York, what happened at the first trial of one of the perpetrators. And somebody would say, oh, my character said this, and my character said that. So we created a sort of civil society in the rehearsal room in New York where each person, had been really, really, really able to kind of not only understand the people they had spent hours interviewing, but bring their voices into the rehearsal room in New York. And from those voices, we created the play.
And the blocking and everything was done that way as well.
I think the beginning of the blocking, the ideas behind the blocking started that way, and then slowly they evolved into, a more, and then I started crafting the final staging of the play.
Amazing. So just in a quick 1 minute, how can you guys like explain to us what do you guys want to do for the future of Tectonic Theater Project?
Well, we just finished a play called Here There Are Blueberries. They play at New York Theater Workshop, and now it's on a national tour. Um, we just want, we want to keep creating work that exists in the intersection of the personal and the political. We want to make theater that addresses audience members as if they are smart, because people are hungry for smart storytelling. And we want it to live at the intersection of the powerful, intelligent, but also popular. Like that word is important to us. We don't want to create elitist theater that only speaks to the lovers of experimental theater. We want to make experimental theater for the masses. So that's the dream.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jeff, any last words for this?
I think
And
Moises really wrapped it up, but I will just say that I think storytelling and it's certainly theater is a very humanizing activity. And so my wish for the future is that we get to continue doing that and creating spaces where people can remember what it is to be a human being and to have community. And I think that's very important in dehumanizing times.
that's beautiful. Well, Jeff, Moises, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know it's very precious. So, Jeff, I think we'll talk very soon. I hope to bring you guys to Brazil sometime in the future. And
Fantastic.
just much appreciation, just not for the work, but for the people you are.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you. Thank
Gustavo.
you.
The best of
Thank you,
luck to you.
everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you, Jeff.